Welcome back, everyone. Today I have a 3-in-1 sewing project. We're going to be making a beanie gaiter neck warmer. And this is a super easy project for all skill levels. And hopefully the tips and techniques I show you throughout the video, you'll be able to utilize those on all your sewing projects. So if you're new to the channel, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you're going to want to grab yourself a 1/2 yard for your main fabric. And for the main fabric, I recommend using a sweater knit, fleece, jersey knit. The main goal is to find a nice thicker fabric that has a decent amount of stretch and will also keep you warm. I'm going to be using a sweater knit on this project. I really like how this fabric worked. I had a nice amount of stretch and thickness to it. So just try to keep that in mind when you're selecting your main fabric. You'll need a 1/2 yard for your secondary fabric, and this is gonna be the lining. So I recommend finding a nice, soft, thin fleece. I'm gonna be using a very thin plush fleece. And the reason I chose this one, it's very similar to a glasses cleaner. So if you're out on the mountain, you could just pull up and wipe your goggles off with this material. And that's a big thing to do, is trying to find fabric that will work with you. You'll need 2 eyelets, and I'm using a 1/4 inch in the video. You can use bigger eyelets if you want, but I think a 1/4 inch works really nice. So keep in mind, this is gonna be a beanie too, because it's a 3-in-1. So you wanna keep stuff as minimal as possible up top. So the 1/4 inch eyelets work really nice. You can cinch it closed and they're hidden. You'll need 15 to 20 inches of round elastic, and I recommend going for a little bit thicker elastic, but pretty much any round elastic will work for this project. You'll also need 1 to 2 cord stoppers, and that's depending on the style you're using, if you're using a 1 opening or a 2 opening. If you're using a 1 opening, you're gonna need 2 cord stoppers. If you're using a 2 opening, you'll just need 1 cord stopper. And I have links to all these supplies below. So there's a link to an assortment of cord stoppers. So buying that 1 pack, you're gonna get a variety of different styles to work with. Same goes for the eyelets. The link will take you to a kit that sets you up with a hole puncher, a die to install it, and a bunch of different styles of eyelets. And lastly, you're gonna need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com, and it's super simple to use. All you have to do is print it out, tape it together, and you're ready to go. And after you cut it out, I recommend cutting off the top and the side edge. This is gonna allow you to overlap the pages to make for a perfect pattern. So once you have your supplies gathered and your pattern printed, it's time to move into cutting. After taping the panels together, your pattern should look like this. Proceed to cut out the panels. You should end up with 1 lining panel, and make sure the stretch is going from left to right. And 1 main outer panel cut out of your main fabric, and the stretch also going from left to right. Start by grabbing your main outer panel, and we're going to start by marking the eyelets. So cut out the eyelet guides on the pattern, line up the pattern evenly on your fabric, and mark it with chalk. We're also going to mark the hem guides on both top and bottom, so mark the outside edges, grab a ruler, and connect the outside markings. Make sure your hem lines are straight and even as possible. The first step is adding our eyelets, and I'm going to be using an eyelet kit. It comes with a punch, a die, and an assortment of eyelets. Grab the punch, and we're going to punch out the chalked eyelet guides on both sides. Grab your eyelets, and we're using a 1/4 inch eyelets for this project, and your die or whatever you're using to install them. This is a 2-piece die, so we're going to grab the bottom and put the top of the eyelet on the bottom. Flip your pattern piece over so the right side's pointing down, and feed the die through your punched hole. Grab the back side of your eyelet and place it on the die. Be sure fabric is tightening around the outside edge. Grab the top portion of your die, place it on top of the bottom die, and hammer into position. And go ahead and repeat this for the opposite side. Fold the panel in half with the right sides together, and we're going to stitch the side edge. And before we get started, for this project, we're going to be using a serger. Sergers are great for stretchy knit fabrics. They're going to allow the fabric to stretch and the thread not to break. They also cut and clean up the edges as you're sewing. I highly recommend using a serger for this project, but if you don't have one, it's totally fine. I'm going to show you another method for sewing stretchy knit on your domestic sewing machine. Switch your machine to a zigzag stitch with the higher width and stitch length, and by doing this, it will allow the thread to stretch with the fabric. And either method works great. I just don't want you to feel left out if you don't have a serger. Keep in mind we're stitching the side edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And it's nice using a serger because you're sewing and cleaning up the edge at the same time. Moving on, grab your lining panel, place the right sides together, and we're going to stitch that side edge, but we're going to leave a gap in the middle. This is going to help us pull the fabric through later on. So the best thing to do is start at the top, start sewing, stop, jump down about 2 to 4 inches, and sew through the bottom. And be sure to make it at least 2 inches. Moving on, we're going to grab the lining, flip the right side out, and we're going to place it on the inside of the main outer panel with right sides together. And it's best to line up the side seams, and we're going to sew all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again, if you don't have a serger, it's not a big deal. Just do a zigzag stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you completed the stitch, we're going to flip the lining out with the wrong sides facing out. From here, we're gonna use a side seam as a guide, and we're gonna flip the right sides together. And you have to do it this exact way, or it's not gonna turn out right when you pull the fabric back through the opening. And once you have the right sides together with the side seams lined up, we're gonna stitch around that bottom edge. It's very hard to pin this, so I suggest just slowly working it and pulling the fabric as you go. So just take your time, go slow, keep working that fabric, and it should turn out perfectly. After stitching, your project should look just like mine, and I know at this point it doesn't fully look right, but find that opening and pull the right sides out. This is where it's going to twist that fabric back into place and separate the lining and outer layers. Flip the lining layer out, and we're going to seal up the side seam opening. Fold the seam towards the inside with the right sides together, and we're going to add a stitch as close as we can to the outside edge. And I recommend using a thread that matches your fabric color. The next step, we're going to add a top stitch along the top edge. So make sure your eyelets are pointing towards the outside, which is the right side of your fabric. And we're going to add a stitch along that top lining, keeping the top perfectly even. I recommend using an edge presser foot. This is going to butt up against that lining edge and give you a nice straight stitch. And these are also very useful on all sewing projects. And we're actually stitching on the lining, so make sure your bobbin thread matches your outer layer fabric. And if you don't have a presser foot, that's totally fine. Just take your time and try to make it as even as possible. And this stitch is also very important to hold that lining into position. Flip the right sides out and grab your elastic. I found 30 inches is a good point to start at, and you can trim it from there. So feed your elastic through the eyelets. And since the elastic is stiffer, it's pretty easy just to feed it straight through, compared to lace going around a hood. Once you have both sides through, even up both ends, and grab the cord stopper of your preference. You can use double or single. I'm using a double, so I'm feeding each elastic end through a separate opening. Once you have your ends in the cord stop, go ahead and cinch it tight so you can see how much extra elastic you have to work with. From here, you can determine how much you want to cut off. To cover up those elastic ends, we're going to be using a cord cap. Feed both of the elastic ends through the cap, and slide the cap on about 2 to 4 inches, giving you enough room to make a knot with the elastic ends. Pull the knot really tight so that way you can slide the cap back over the knot. And lastly, trim the ends that are poking out of the cap. And cinch it tight one more time just to make sure the placement of your cap is right, because you can always move that knot and cap very easily. And there you have it, your 3-in-1 is complete. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I hope you had fun with the sewing project and you gained some useful tips along the way that you can apply on all your projects. If you ever have questions about the pattern or the sewing process, definitely send us a message on our website or comment down below. And like always, if you have anything you want us to make, send it our way as well. But until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.